My mother was a kitchen girl. My father was a garden boy. That's why I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist.
Socialist. That's why I'm a socialist. That's why I'm a socialist. That's why I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist. My mother was a kitchen girl.
You guide me by your wise advice, and then you lead me to a position of honor. Who do I have in heaven but you? Lord, we pray for the program of the day, those who will be facilitating, those who will be sharing with us their insights and thoughts. That, Lord, as we go through the day, we are protected and guided by you. We ask all this in that wonderful and mighty name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Heshima, umoja na amani hizi ni ngao zetu, Afrika na watu wake, ibariki Afrika, ibariki Afrika, tubariki watoto wa Afrika. Mungu ibariki Tanzania, dumisha uhuru na umoja wake kwa waume na watoto. Mungu ibariki Tanzania na watu wake, ibariki Tanzania, ibariki Tanzania, tubariki watoto wa Tanzania.
Marcelino la rona que empoia motimo que vosotros borra eso alenengo cajiso.
Ante awan pomungtan ketane tot ai chang kepie rong na ai mai kan chen ma kra phe sai awai kwatro kau na ante krai bukop bukana re
Malawi tikolo kongola la chonendi ufuru nyanja ndi mpepo ya mapiri nditu ditadala kala koma dambu abwino pato za ulele kala koma boko Malawi. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
The point is that we shall overcome mining exploitation someday.
Some of us are in the, we might have a future in the music industry. But some of us should not quit their day jobs. Of course, I'm just joking.
My role this morning is not to tell you presentation by presentation what was discussed yesterday, but in a sense start by attempting to respond to the question that was asked just before we parted yesterday. I think one of our colleagues inquired about what is the purpose, what is the point, or how do all these breakaway sessions connect? And the connection of whatever happened yesterday is in our theme. Our resources, our future. That is what binds, that is what connects whatever deliberations transpired yesterday. We're very moving, engaging, and even at times provocative discussions, presentations, some that challenged us to maybe think differently about the way we are doing things. I want to highlight, I think, the panel discussion as one of the key sessions, in the sense that it availed an opportunity for all of us to listen at the same time, in a sense to drink from the same cup. And to some extent, we are repeating that today when Aiden joins us later on, so that everybody can be with. But then that's not to take away from the various discussions that took place in the breakaway sessions. I just want to remind all of us that as we were conceptualizing and discussing what we do for the fifth alternative mining in Indaba, we wanted to focus on thinking about the solutions, not so much about the problems. Because for the last 4 years, we've been convening and discussing the narrative. So my prayer and hope is that today we will start converging towards the solutions or the opportunities for you and me to intervene in the various challenges that we're identified in the extractive sector. But like somebody mentioned, the breakaway session on oil, gas, forestry, and I must add water, is a special dimension which we wanted to also give prominence in the extractive sector. We had a little bit of a conversation between me and one of our colleagues on the water sector, because they wanted to move into the community what's that breakaway session? Community rights, key to empowerment. Because they thought it was more to do with community. And I thought, no, but water is one area that we're not paying attention to as much. Perhaps coming years we may need to look at maybe fisheries. So, without taking a lot of our time from our conversations, it is about our resources, our future, putting local people first. And then the 5 areas are the points that we read, identified, and thought would help us focus in prioritizing, in appreciating our resources and the role they play in defining the future that we aspire to.
My mother was a kitchen girl. My father was an ex-miner. That's why I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist. That's why I'm a socialist. That's why I'm a socialist. That's why I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist. I'm a socialist. Amanda!
My name is Caroline Taufani. I'm wearing too many hats, but right now I'm wearing a hat of Val Environmental Justice Alliance. which is the organization based here in South Africa in the area called Vanderbilt Park. And the communities there in Vanderbilt Park, they are facing a very giant steel manufacturing company, which is called ArcelorMittal. I think in some people, they will have ArcelorMittal in their countries. So because I only have 5 minutes, I'll try to present this case study as quick as I can. But first, let me show you why it's about the case that the communities won against the company, because the communities, they were asking the companies to give them information about their pollution for about 12 years, and the companies have been denying. But let me show you these pictures. They're the pictures of why communities were looking for that information and then how we're going to use that information. This is a slag dam, and just across this slag dam, it's where the companies were dumping their slag. And there were communities staying there, and the name of the communities was called Steel Valley. And this is the company pollution that we experience daily in Vanderbilt Park. Just, and then this is some of the slag heaps that you see in the companies. This picture, you won't see it now because they were forced to clean up, but this picture, you will see it now. But the relevance between getting this information and showing you this picture is to show people that it can take 50 years before people can see the impact of pollution in their areas. Normally when we speak up with the communities, some communities, they will say, no, I've been staying here for 50 years, I'm not coughing, I'm not sick. But this shows that the impact of pollution is not an event. They take long before people can actually see that they are suffering and impacted. So this is the company also, and then you see their dams, and then their dams that are seeping on the ground, and then you see the seepages reaching the surface, and which has led this area to have a problem because the communities in that area, they were using a borehole water system. And then they discovered that their water that they were drinking, they were making them sick, and then they've got many cancers, they've got skin irritations and all those problems because of this seepages, because the dams, they were not underlined according to what the standards, according to what the companies they were supposed to do. They were supposed to underline the dam so that it doesn't seep into. And then the water, because the dam were not underlined, when it's raining, you see the water flowing through the rivers and the streams. So after these communities being affected, they were forced to leave their farm and go and stay in the nearby township and leave their houses. So this is what the area looked like after the communities leaving their areas. So this is used to be a vibrant communities, and they have their livelihood. They having a business of vegetables, selling vegetables, and their livestock also got badly affected. So this is what you see right now in this area. So now, what we used, the Environmental Justice Alliance worked with Center for Environmental Rights. Center for Environmental Rights helped VEJA to file for what we call using PAIA. PAIA is the promotion of access to information. It's one of the laws that we have here in South Africa. And the purpose of the Act, this is just the purpose of the Act, is to give effect to the constitutional right of access to information held by the state, any information that is held by any other person that is required for the exercise of protection of any right. I won't read the whole of this, but what is important is that the information that is held by the state, or any information that is held by any person and that is required for exercising any rights. So, and then it was an act that was promulgated in 2002, so like I said before, that this community, they've been asking for this information for 12 years. We had a meeting in the boardrooms with the companies, and the companies promised that they would give information, but when we leave, the companies also changed their mind. So the company had information, Department of Environmental Affairs has information, but when you go to Department of Environmental Affairs, they will say, no, the company must also give us the permission to give us this information, to give it to you. So we cannot give this information to you. So the information that we're looking for is what is called a master plan. The master plan that was containing, remember I showed you the picture of the land, how the land was damaged and dead. So it was showing the 20 years plan of the rehabilitation plan, how the companies is going to reduce the impact of water quality, how it's going to reduce the air quality emissions, how it's going to rehabilitate. The slag dam that I showed you is being rehabilitated now, but we wanted to see if the company, they followed the procedures to rehabilitate that plan. And so the case took place, and I think it was on the 10th or 13th of September, where the judge at the court says VEJA is entitled to protect and exercise the rights and health by seeking information to enable them to access environmental impacts. So we see ourselves as a pollution watchdog. And Section 24 of our constitution in our country gives us the right to environmental that is not harmful. So but if we don't have this information, how would we exercise those rights? How would we be able to monitor, to become the watchdog, also to participate meaningfully in the environmental development? So the case went through the following processes. In between 2000 and 2002, this is when the ArcelorMittal was developing this master plan. So, and in May 2007, the illegal dumps of hazardous waste is picked up during the inspection of Reinhard site, and as well as air pollution in the underground water pollution. In November 2008, inspection of the Vanderbilt Park site revealed lack of waste permits and registration certificates. So this is the information that the company has been refusing because they knew that they don't have permits, they don't also have registration. They were not complying with any of the standards that we have in South Africa. So in 2007, illegal dump site that you see, Department of Environmental Affairs stepped in, but we don't know what happened in that case. So in 2011, that's when VEJA, with Center for Environmental Rights, filed permission of access to information, request the master plan, and any reports about their implementation. And in 2012, January, the lawyers asked for the extension to respond to the request. Then in 2012, the dates AMSA handing over, that we're supposed to hand over the documents, we received a letter in which ArcelorMittal refuses to give the information again. And in March, they've asked for another extension. And then what was interesting is when ArcelorMittal was refusing to give this information, they were saying that the group failed to prove the needs, the records to protect the rights. Remember, we're talking about the area where the people had to move out from that area, where the house was completely demolished because they didn't have water. And we're also talking about people who got sick, even some of the people who was Benchmark Foundation did a study of the ex-workers of ArcelorMittal who were affected by the pollution. But now they were saying that whose rights do we need to protect? So they were saying that that information we have to prove that we need to. So they were just making it difficult for us because they know that you have to get the medical tests, you need to do so many things to prove that they polluted the area. And then, but in September 2013, the case went to court, and that's where the judge was giving this judgment to say, as the communities, we have rights to access information so that we access the right to our healthy environment, and then that we need to be watchdog. And so I think that is that. But the same law that gives us the right, they also gives the companies the right to appeal. Up to today, it was in September 2012 when we won the case, but ArcelorMittal appealed. because they're saying that the document is outdated. So there's nothing that we can do with that document even if we want it. So the question is, if the document is so outdated, it's so irrelevant, why the company is still refusing communities to see that document? Why are they hiding that information? Why is it a secrecy? And why did they make other departments to sign a secrecy to say, you will keep this document and you'll never give it to someone? And during our engagement in their boardrooms, when they were agreeing to give us this document, when we arrived in the meeting, they had a PowerPoint presentation with the selection in that document to say we will present this part, but we will not present that part. But we left because what we know is that we wanted this document. So I think it's a victory, even if we don't have the document in our hands, and we still believe that the case will be heard again, and we will still get the same outcome, that we need to have this document to exercise our rights.
My name is Father Ted Chinga from Zambia, particularly Mansa district, that is in Ruapura province. I'm going to give a testimony of the mine accident which happened in Mansa district at one of the manganese mine. The Natural Resource Management Program of the Council of Churches in Zambia aim to promote transparency and accountability in management of mineral resources for poverty reduction. Our Council of Churches in Zambia has, among other things, worked with mining communities to raise awareness on their rights, as well as how they must respond to the issues that affect as a result of the mining activities. The Council of Zambia Committee of Mansa Districts is one of the committees that have worked to promote the rights of the people in the mining communities, and below is one of the cases that the CCZ committee in Mansa played a role in it. In the 2011, there was a mine accident at Kafrafuta mine, that is in Kaloshi village in Mansa district, of which 2 workers, Mr. Donald Musenge, aged 23, and Stephen Chirando, aged 31, were seriously injured in that accident. And upon learning that there would be issues of compensation, the mine owner disappeared and was nowhere to be seen. As the injured victims tried to sue the company for compensation, they got information that the mine owner was dead. They, however, went ahead and sued the company for compensation in Mansa, Samfia Local Court, where the case commenced on the 20th December 2012. The local court ruling. The accident victim lost the case as the local court stated that the victims could not claim any compensation since the mine owner was dead. After losing the case, the accident victim then sought the intervention of the Council of Churches in Zambia committee in Mansa and requested the church to assist on the way forward. CCZ intervention. The Council of Churches team then investigated. We have a video which I would have shown, but when investigating this case, the village headman didn't know that we are actually recording what he was saying. When we went to the village headman, he told us that anyway, the owner of the mine is not dead. I was promised to be given 14 million kwacha if at all he can assist of hiding the information about the whereabouts of the owner of the mine. But since he never committed to give that 14 million, instead he gave the village headman 1.5 million. Then the village headman says, the owner of the mine is Ephraim Banda, and he's still alive. He's in Mufurira, house number A16, Kankoyo. The village gentleman didn't know exactly that whatever he's saying, I'm recording him, because I was behind him when he was taking me to the site of the mine where the accident happened. So upon this, hearing this, we as the Council of Churches team in Mansa, we appealed the case through the magistrate court in Mansa, in Sanfia district. The accident victim, when they went to the magistrate court, they provided evidence through our team over the video that we took to when we were investigating the case. The case in the magistrate court commenced on the February 15th, 2013, and the judgment was passed on the 22nd February 2013, magistrate court ruling. The magistrate court ruled in favor of the accident victim, stating that the company immediately pays the victim, because when the case commenced, I personally, I was the one standing in between the accident victims. When I gave the testimony and evidence, that video we had on my phone here, the court really saw what was happening, and they ran the owner of the mine. Fortunately enough, he answered the call, and he was asked, "Where are you?" Then they said, "I am in Mufurira." Then they said, "We have a deal. We need to buy manganese. Where can we meet and when?" Then he gave them the date. Then the court postponed the case, and they ordered the police in Mufurira to go at the said location, and the guy was arrested. This case, the guy was charged to pay the victim 18,000 kwacha, which is equivalent to $3,600 each to the mine accident victims, and also a 900 kwacha, which is approximately $180 monthly pay till their life. This is how we won this case. But because of short of time, there is a video here, but I'll make sure that I'll ban on the CDs, so those who would want to watch and see how we intervene in this court case, they are able to see a vivid example. And we are very proud that we are still having another case which is yet to commence in the court, whereby by lack of infrastructure, Atlanta Mining also had a case whereby there was a fire which broke on, and 2 of the victims were badly bent, and the case is yet to commence in the court.
I want to give a brief introduction to ICMM, who we are, how we operate, because many of you won't have heard of us. I then want to explore the concept of mining and social protection, which is the focus of this session here. And then thirdly, I want to give an overview of some resource governance challenges in Africa, because my sense is, rightly or wrongly, there is an inextricable link between this concept of mining and social protection and the governance context within which mining takes place. And then lastly, I want to come back to some remaining challenges, but also to talk a little bit about some collaborative opportunities to address these. Looking first at ICMM, we were established in 2002, in fact 2001, as a catalyst for performance improvement in the mining and metal sector. In 2002, we promulgated a series of principles which all our members are bound by. Our vision is one of leading mining and metals companies working together and with others to advance the contribution of mining to sustainable development. We're CEO-led, and what that means in practice is that the CEOs of our member companies are intimately involved in conversations around mining and sustainability. So they meet twice a year to help set the direction for the organization. We've got 2 types of members. We have 22 corporate members, in fact now 21, because one of them was acquired by another company. We have 34 association members. The distinction there is that those corporate members have to adhere to the principles, policy positions that ICMM collectively puts out through its membership, and they have to align their own internal policy frameworks with those ICMM policies. That can be quite powerful, because ultimately they then have to be accountable for that, and they do that through annual independent reporting and assurance of that reporting. The association members are important for another reason, and that's because 22 members is a very small fraction of the total mining industry. It's just 22 companies out of maybe 5,000 companies globally. Having said that, those 22 companies represent somewhere between 30 and 50% of global production of major commodities. And the association members give us reach to something like 1,500 other companies, and that gives us a point of influence with a much wider part of the mining sector. Just 3 of our corporate members are headquartered here in South Africa. More than half of our members have operations in sub-Saharan Africa in 17 different countries. Since 2001, the members of ICMM have progressively strengthened the commitments of membership. So as of 2011, the responsibility for becoming a new member of ICMM has been devolved to a third-party and independent expert review panel. I mentioned that back in 2002, members had adopted these principles, and that sets out those clear performance expectations and then related reporting. I want to switch gears now and come on to this second point about mining and social protection, and to explore that term. So, from my perspective, when we talk about mining and social protection, it immediately puts us into the space of a do-no-harm mentality. It begs the question, how can mines be developed in a manner that doesn't disadvantage local communities socially, economically, or environmentally? For example, how can we ensure that mining doesn't disrupt people's access to environmental resources or the social and economic infrastructure that underpins their way of life or their livelihoods? And I was very struck by the video there, the unreported royal video, where clearly, even in the relocation village, there was a huge question around the ability of people to successfully contain their way of life or to have viable livelihoods. The same principle of do no harm underpins the IFC performance standards on social and environmental sustainability. It also underpins the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And it's reflected in the legal frameworks of many states within which mining companies do business, and it includes compliance with laws relating to labour rights, social protection, environmental protection. Having said that, the reality is that mining projects present complex social, economic and environmental challenges that are difficult to manage. Why? Because minerals are inextricably linked to land. So while almost all, I think all African governments, most governments internationally, have declared ownership of subsurface resources in the interests of the wider citizenry, invariably the citizens whose lives are most directly impacted by mining have a more tangible sense of ownership and have related expectations of benefit. So mineral resources can only be developed through accessing the land of local people. And in many cases, as you're aware, that land may be expropriated by the state and people are relocated, as we saw in Leptadang, and that creates the risk that the local owners and users of land become most disadvantaged as a result of mining activity. In effect, their social and economic well-being is placed at risk in the interests of the wider population. For national governments with pressing financial needs to support broader-based social and economic development, the temptation may be to sacrifice local community well-being for the greater good. However, for mining companies, there is great jeopardy in adopting that kind of an attitude. The reality is that mining companies can only be successful in the long term if they enjoy the support of the communities within which they operate. Where this inevitably takes us is into a discussion about the rights of communities and the respective roles of states and of companies regarding these rights. I briefly mentioned the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and they offer a clear separation between the respective roles of states and companies. So states have a duty to protect against human rights abuses by third parties, and that might include by companies through appropriate policies, regulation, and providing access to remedy. States also have a duty to ensure the protection and enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights of citizens, and acknowledging that the fulfillment of these rights by states is always subject to available resources. At the same time, it's really important to acknowledge that states have a duty to ensure that the enjoyment of these rights is facilitated by progress against civil and political rights. Companies, on the other hand, have a responsibility to respect human rights. which means that business enterprise should act with due diligence to avoid infringing on the rights of others, and that they should seek to address any adverse impacts with which they're involved. The guiding principles also acknowledge that companies may voluntarily undertake activities to support and promote human rights, which may contribute to the enjoyment of rights. But this goes beyond that basic do no harm principle we talked about. If we look at how companies look to deliver on this do no harm commitment, one of the main approaches that they've used is to conduct integrated environmental and social impact assessments, which most countries specify as part of the process of seeking project approvals. Now, originally these focused almost exclusively on environmental issues, but over time they've evolved to embrace social, health, human rights related issues. That evolution in scope reflects a blurring in the boundaries between what is an environmental, a social, or a human rights issue. And for those of you who've been active in this space for some time, you'll know that 2 decades ago, water, for example, was almost exclusively thought of as an environmental issue. You fast forward a decade, and suddenly water was as much a social issue as it was an environmental issue. And then more recently, all the discourse around water relates to that right to access to water. And that's really been consolidated by the UN General Assembly, adopting a resolution on water as a human right. So we've seen that sort of evolutionary process take place. Done well, I think ESIAs can provide a solid basis for identifying, avoiding, mitigating, or managing the long-term environmental and social issues of concern to host communities. However, let's acknowledge that in some instances, insufficient attention is paid to fully understand potential adverse consequences. Human rights due diligence is somewhat different, and I think it has the advantage of being able to be applied at any stage of a project, not just at that front end. So even if a company's been operating for several years, there's an opportunity to take a reflective look at how the company may be adversely impacting the rights of host communities. The conduct of due diligence should address human rights impacts that are caused or contributed to by companies, or where they are directly linked to a company's operations, products, or services through business relationships. Now, there is a range of publicly available tools and guidance around the conduct of ESIA due diligence. ICMM's put out some of this. This is an example of a piece of work we did to translate that due diligence obligation expressed in the human rights norms, or the human rights guiding principles, into practical guidance for the mining sector. However, despite this range of tools, the breadth of participation in this alternative mining environment and the strength of your conviction that social protections are inadequate suggest that all of these processes and guidance are just not enough. Further evidence is provided by the apparent increase in mining-related company-community conflicts in recent years, and the Leptadung example is just one example of that. Let me switch to the third part of my presentation now, which is really to focus on some of the resource governance challenges facing Africa, because I'm absolutely convinced it links back to this question of social protection inextricably. What this map shows is the extent of mineral dependence in sub-Saharan Africa. If southern Sudan were technically in sub-Saharan Africa, it would also be on this map as mineral dependent, because mineral dependent really relates to those countries where export earnings, or in excess of 25% of your export earnings, are derived from minerals, and that could be mining or oil and gas. Now, while just 2/3 of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa can be categorized as mineral dependent, as you can see, it represents more than 90% of the land mass, and I'm sure it touches more than 90% of the population. 18 of these are mineral dependent primarily by virtue of metals and minerals, 12 because of oil and gas. Now, the scale of the contribution is apparent from the figures here. On the left-hand side, we see that mining contributes just over 25% of export earnings in Ghana. But as you go down the slide, we see Zambia and Botswana in excess of 80% of export earnings derived from mining and minerals. In the oil and gas sector, the situation is even more acute, where in places like Equatorial Guinea and Angola, almost all of export earnings are derived from oil. Having said that, there's a number of countries on that left-hand side, like Ghana, Tanzania and Mozambique, where oil is going to become increasingly significant in the economic life of those countries, and my sense is that those will increase accordingly. Look, key point here is that this just underscores the importance of extractors in Africa. I don't know if you've heard from Rob from Revenue Watch Institute. Rob, I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I did want to mention about the Resource Governance Index, because in 2013, the Revenue Watch Institute launched the Resource Governance Index, which provides a composite measure of transparency and accountability in the oil, gas, and mining sectors. Now, so far, the Resource Governance Index covers just 58 countries, and 15 of those are in Africa. But those 58 countries cover 85% of the world's petroleum, 90% of diamonds, and 80% of copper. The index looks at four things. It looks at institutional and legal aspects, reporting and disclosure, safeguards quality control that encourage integrity, and the broader enabling environment for good governance. And what I've tried to show on this slide is the relative position of mineral-dependent countries in Africa on the Resource Governance Index. And the scores decrease from left to right. What the slide shows that only 3 countries, and that includes Ghana and Zambia, fall into the partially satisfactory governance category. The rest exhibit either weak or failing levels of governance. Now, a key question here is whether resource governance matters, either to investors who are present at the African Mining Indaba, down in the Convention Centre, or in terms of development outcomes. So I want to take a closer look at those 8 countries here from both of those perspectives, and just to list, because it's quite hard to read this, I appreciate, from the back. It's Ghana, Zambia, South Africa, Tanzania, Botswana, Guinea, DRC, and Zimbabwe. Going to look firstly at investor perspectives on the investment climate in those 8 countries. The Fraser Institute is a Canadian organisation, and it conducts an annual survey of mining company executives. In 2000, their survey was based on responses from 4,000 companies, or rather questionnaires to 4,000 companies, in excess of about 740 responses. And what this shows is company perspectives on those 4 factors that influence the investment climate: mineral potential, regulatory certainty, effectiveness of the legal system, and the taxation regime. And it considers the extent to which these would either encourage or deter investment. So green bar means it will encourage investment, the orange bar is that it's a mild deterrent on investment, and the red bar is that it represents a strong or a complete deterrent on investment. And what the figures appear to show, and just get an impressionistic sense of the green travelling into red, is that governance rankings of countries matter hugely in terms of their attractiveness as an investment destination. On all 4 metrics, the weaker the governance climate, the greater the deterrent to investment. There are exceptions to the rule, but on balance, investors favour lower risk environments. Now, the main exception, as you can see here, is Botswana, where investors seem to have a more optimistic view of investment than the governance data, certainly from Revenue Watch, would suggest. But overall, investor perspectives are becoming less optimistic in terms of mining. Now, this is important because it suggests that high governance countries will be winners rather than losers in attracting foreign direct investment, as capital expenditures in the sector invariably decrease in the coming years. In 2002, investment in mining globally represented about 30 billion. In 2012, 10 years later, that had increased to a record high of 125 billion, and current projections are by end of 2015 will be back down to 50 billion. So really significant decrease. Those resource governance, those countries where resource governance is at a high should be winners in that. Very briefly, for those same 8 countries, these graphs plot their position against a number of social metrics. Human Development Index, which is a composite measure of life expectancy, education, and incomes, and the numbers here are out of a maximum of 1. The Failed States Index is a measure of a country's vulnerability against a range of social, economic, and political measures. And the numbers here are percentage rankings relative to the 171 countries covered by that index. The 2 down the bottom is 2 Corruption Perceptions Index, one by Transparency International, one by the Open Budget Index, and these are percentage rankings out of a maximum of 100. again, the impressionistic sense that I hope this gives is that it shows that where governance is weak, human development is adversely affected. Where governance is weak, states have a greater vulnerability to failure, and where governance is weak, perceptions of corruption are greater. Interestingly, and I think this is something perhaps for Revenue Watch to consider, the exception here again, the country that bucks the trend is Botswana, which outperforms its relative position on the Resource Governance Index. The three lowest ranked countries are Guinea, DRC and Zimbabwe, consistent with their positions as being lowest ranked in the Resource Governance Index. So improving resources governance is profoundly important for Africa. And that takes us right back to that question of roles and responsibilities between states, companies and civil society. And so in closing, I wanted to reflect on why challenges around social protection still remain, and the potential for collaboration between the mining sector and CSOs to address these challenges. I think the human rights framework is a helpful starting point to ensure social protection, but the discourse by many civil society organisations over rights often blurs those boundaries of responsibility between mining companies and government. Where governments have proven to be ineffective deliverers of development and the progressive realisation of economic, social and cultural rights, CSOs often take, I would say, the easy option of insisting that companies step in to take on those roles of government. And from a geographic perspective, most but not all mining projects and operations are located in remote areas that may be very poorly served by social and economic infrastructure. And this gives rise to what I think of as a paradox of proximity. There's a direct and understandable correlation between communities' expectation of benefit from mining operations and their proximity to those operations. Nearby communities experience those disruptive effects as we've discussed, but the paradox arises because those same communities that understandably have expectations of benefit are often least well positioned to take advantage of potential opportunities. And that might be by virtue of shortcomings in social and economic infrastructure or related factors related to education, attainment, etc. Now, government can often exacerbate the situation by withdrawing or restricting the already limited resources that they provide to meet the development aspirations of communities within mining regions, on the expectation that mining companies will step in to address the shortfalls. As a result, companies often become the focus of the aspirations of local communities and become drawn into the provision of social and economic infrastructure. Now you might ask, why does this matter? Isn't it completely reasonable to expect mining companies to be in the business of providing social and economic infrastructure? Well, I think it is entirely reasonable to expect that communities in the vicinity of mining operations share in the potential benefits that mining can bring, and that they're not disadvantaged socially, economically, or environmentally. I also think it's entirely reasonable that companies play their part, and they are legally mandated to do so in some countries. For example, here in South Africa, through the mining charter and related social and labour plans. However, to put the burden of expectations on companies rather than on governments runs contrary to the social contract, and it undermines government's capacity and legitimacy in the longer term. It also runs the risk of absolving individuals in society from playing their part in helping to shape their futures. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights explicitly recognises the reciprocal principle that the enjoyment of rights and freedoms also implies the performance of duties on the part of everyone. So, my parting challenge to you is to suggest that far more unites the participants at this conference and those of the African Mining Indaba than divides us. My hope is for a more collaborative future where companies and CSOs partner to ensure that government effectively delivers on its responsibilities, supported by the mineral wealth that is so prevalent within the African continent. From my perspective, this offers the best prospect for a future where African citizens are true beneficiaries of the developmental opportunities afforded by mining and not the victims.
So what difference does ICMM make in terms of those standards? And then I think around local expectations and infrastructure development, we can give examples in South Africa where Anglo-American built towns, built cities, all the amenities, healthcare facilities, and everything at one stage. So because they impact directly in these areas and in these communities and have responsibility, and where do you draw the line between government and corporations? Thanks.
I want to go direct to where you finished at, or where you finish off. Not observing governments break their responsibilities in the countries where mining companies are operating. That probably is based on the assumption that mining companies or oil companies that do business in those countries are also faithful to their ethical standards and even to corporate social responsibility obligations. Particularly when you come to allegations of tax evasion by companies, when you come to issues like transfer pricing or mispricing, and therefore those governments, even though they might be obliged to look after their own people, but if the resources they're depending on are not producing enough money for or through taxation, is it realistic then to just say quickly that people should not expect mining companies or oil companies to help the local people where they're operating? Is that realistic? If you take into consideration the fact that there's a lot of quote-unquote cheating going on among the companies themselves.
I just wanted to understand you. I probably misunderstood you, and I apologize in advance that you quoted some countries as being countries where there's good governance and therefore there are good investment environments. I wanted to understand what benchmarks are used by your organization to determine what is good governance and what isn't. And I'm thinking in the relation to my country, Zambia, which is one of those very good investment environments. And I'm wondering whether signing contracts in secret is one of the benchmarks for good governance, and agreeing to all the conditions of the investors, leaving out all the citizens. I'm just wondering, help me please to understand your benchmarks for good governance. Thank you.
Let's take the specifics of Zambia, because we're in the middle of doing a piece of work in Zambia. And, you know, there is a challenge in Zambia. One of the key challenges you have in Zambia is that you've been through a period of private ownership, followed by a period of public ownership, followed by a period of private ownership, which we're currently in. And the end of the period of public ownership coincided with a dramatic drop in commodity prices, frankly, dramatic underinvestment by the state-owned vehicle for investment in Zambia, the ZCCM, and ultimately an almost, partial collapse of the industry. Then we saw a process in the late 1990s of privatization at a time of a global commodity slump. And so Zambia at that point as an attractive investment climate didn't really rate particularly highly. But I think quite honestly, government of Zambia had to offer preferential terms to attract inward investment at that time. And that's reflected in some of those contracts that exist today. Having said that, government of Zambia has moved progressively to up the take by government through a series of interventions subsequently. And we've done some work in Zambia. We're almost at the end of that. We'll be presenting it back in Lusaka, hopefully in April. I'll make sure I get your card so you can come to that. But what we've seen over the last decade is that the contribution of mining in Zambia to government revenues has gone from almost nothing, in fact, to just 8% 3-4 years ago, partly because those investments that were made by companies a decade ago, they were still writing off, if you like, the costs of those. And now we see that mining contributes to 30% of revenue from within Zambia. That's not my figures, that's the Zambian Revenue Authority figures. So there's a real opportunity space in Zambia, I think, around mining. There are still challenges. I don't want to pretend there aren't, but happy to take some of that offline, because I want to get to these other two questions. Bishop, your point about absent capacity or resources on the part of governments, isn't it entirely reasonable for companies to play a role? I think it is absolutely reasonable. And here's why I think the limit, if you can't completely separate the boundary of responsibility, but certainly companies have an absolute obligation to compensate for the harms that they do. We talked about this do no harm standard. So if in coming into an environment you create additional pressures on social and economic infrastructure, if you displace people, if you adversely impact their livelihoods or their way of life, all of this has to be addressed by companies not as a matter of benefit, but as a matter of restitution, if you like. And so it's very important that companies absolutely occupy that space. Companies also have a very powerful role to play, I think, in being a partner with government and helping to build some capacity at that local municipal level. But actually, that's not companies' core competence. Civil society organisations are far better placed to help build that local capacity. And we've seen, in my mind, instances that are just a crying shame, where local municipalities have had money don't go back to them as a result of money development in the region, but have no capacity to spend that money effectively. That's where I think the civil society, company-government partnerships come in. And John, your point about the RUGI framework and local expectations of development. John, is John there? You're there. I fear I may have sort of lost the thread of this because I'm struggling to read my own scribble, so apologies. But I think it was about where companies are, where companies have impacted communities. Where do you draw that line? For me, the line is clear. Companies have that absolute obligation to deal with matters related to impact, and that's exclusively their role. And I think there is sometimes a mistaken view that you lump together compensation, benefit, and all other factors. I think these things need to be clearly separated. So no community should ever feel that something they're getting is a benefit when actually it's a compensation for something that they have lost. When you get into that space of provision of social and economic infrastructure, that's a separate matter. If that isn't properly tackled, it come back at me. Having said that, and let's the elephant in the room, if you like, is that there are some responsible players who have gone into DRC and I think have sought to do things in a way that is both respectful of human rights, but also in a way that is, has a development aspiration. I think there have been many opportunistic and less responsible players that have gone into the DRC. And frankly, I look to the people in this room to hold those companies' heels to the fire where they get it wrong. Equally, I think where our companies get it wrong, they ought to be accountable as well. But certainly, let's recognise there is a spread of practice within the mining industry.
As a community-based organization, Michel, what you're talking about, this investment, I don't know about it. It doesn't come to me at all. Please, make sure that is the presentation of the research that you do. You say the mine made so much money and invested so much in the communities. That will be very good. But if you tell us the mine did this, they're doing very well and so on, to the government or whatever, you must talk about the community. What is that again?
We saw what happened in West Africa in the 70s and 80s. Now people are fighting. We saw Arab Springs. Multinationals, when they come in these rich countries, they work with the same corrupt governments. They know the governments are corrupt. Or they partner with someone whom they know that they are going to create internal conflicts. What are the strategies of your organization to help the multinationals understand that without transfer of technology and technology capacity building for the indigenous private sector as partners for this business?
There are many instances of where communities have been disadvantaged as a result of mining. The organisation I work for, the sole reason we exist is to try and create a situation where that doesn't happen. The second point about multinational companies and the link to corruption and strategies to promote local employment or economic opportunity. Absolutely appreciate this point about corruption. One of the preconditions for any company to be a member of ICMM is that they are a supporter of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. We absolutely believe that that is a critical aspect of the governance agenda. There are also other ethical standards that apply around anti-corruption for members. But again, you can look at that on the website, and we can kind of talk offline on this. On the question of broader economic opportunity, this is a vexing one, it's a difficult one. And because a lot of what we do is not at the country level, we don't often get to go there. But the work we're currently doing in Zambia, for example, a primary finding there and a primary focus going forward will be to see how do you increase that local economic opportunity. And what we found, quite frankly, is that the enabling environment by government to create that local opportunity is extremely weak. And so we're trying to work with development partners like the World Bank, DFID, and civil society organizations in Zambia to break that logjam. And then the last question, or there was a last question around the disconnect, the incredulity that there's more that divides us than unites us. There is a basic division, I suppose, and that division may be that either you see mining as having no prospect or no potential to contribute to the social and economic development of a country or a continent, or you believe that it has that potential. And the key lies in realizing that potential. And to realize that potential, you can only do that through making sure that mining takes place in a responsible manner. When I first came to Indaba 5-6 years ago, I think there was one presentation that touched upon sustainability in a side session. This Indaba, I could have spent my entire time in sessions that dealt with either development or sustainability and never have touched upon a single presentation from the investment community there. It's risen up the agenda of the mainstream mining Indaba in a very, very rapid way. I had the privilege of interviewing Paul Collier at the end of yesterday, and again he signalled the imperative of mining playing that development role in Africa looking to the next decade. So that I think is perhaps one possible basic point of division, but my sense is there's way more that unites us than you may think.